So I'm going to show you how to solve a linear equation right now with the variables on the same side. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to look on the left side and see if we can simplify or combine any like terms. So we've got two like terms here. We've got a 2x and we've got a 3x. Notice that when I highlighted these, I highlighted the sign in front of them because you always want to use the sign in front of the number. So -2, so that would be -2x plus 3x. Well, if you type that in your calculator, -2 plus 3, you're going to get a positive 1x. You can write the 1 in front of the x, but you don't need to because it's implied. I haven't done anything with that 5 yet, so I'm just going to bring it down, equals 4. Now we need to isolate the x and get the x by itself by moving the 5 to the other side. But in order to move the 5 to the other side, you have to do the opposite of adding the 5. So what we're going to do is subtract the 5. Now remember, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. And when you subtract, you can only subtract and add from like terms. So this plus 5 minus 5 will add up to 0. So we have x plus 0 equals a -1. 4 minus 5 is a -1. And x plus 0 is just x. So if you didn't need that step, you don't need to include it. But I did want to show you that this gives you 0. So we need to bring that 0 down. So now the solution to this is a -1. Now we can always check our solution to make sure that it is correct. And so in order to do that, what we can do is we can take the -1 and we can plug it into the original just to check and make sure that it's okay. So then to do that, we would say -2 times x is a -1 plus 5 plus 3 times x, which is a -1, equals 4. And so now what you can do is plug this in your calculator to make sure that it works. A negative and a positive, a negative times a negative is a positive 2. Bring down your 5 plus 3. Now you have to multiply first. So 3 and a -1 would be a -3 equals 4. Then 2 plus 5, I'm running out of room. 2 plus 5 is 7, minus 3 equals 4, and 7 minus 3 is 4. So since we got 4 equals 4, that means we solved this equation correctly. So the answer is x is a -1. Let's take a look at the next problem that I have here. I am going to erase some of this so I can fit it in. So now what we want to do is we're going to solve this equation. This equation is a little bit longer. It has parentheses in it, and what it also has is it has an n on two sides of the equation. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to simplify each side. In order to start simplifying, we have to get rid of those parentheses first by distributing that 5. And so when we distribute that 5, we're multiplying the 5 with everything in the parentheses. So 5 times n is 5n. 5 times a -2, so a positive 5 times a -2 is a -10. Now I haven't used this 2 in front yet, so I'm just going to bring down the 2 plus, because it is still positive 5, because it's a positive 5 times a positive 5 times a positive n, which would give us a positive 5n. Then I'm going to bring down my -10 plus 3n. Now I would check to see if I can combine these together, but I can't because they're not like terms. One's got an n and one's not, so we cannot add them together. But on the left side, we do have some more like terms that we can combine and add together. We've got this positive 2 and a -10. So if we combine those together and we perform the operation 2 minus 10, we're going to get a -8. I haven't done anything with the 5n yet, so I'm going to bring that down. And then once again, I'm going to bring the 10 plus 3n down because we cannot add those together when they have different variable. One's got a variable and one doesn't. They have to be the same variable. So now we can no longer reduce the left, we can no longer reduce the right, but we've got an n on both sides. And so in order to solve for n, we need to get n to the same side so that we can isolate the value. So what I'm going to do is subtract. You can subtract 5n. I prefer to subtract the 3n because then when I do the subtraction on the left, it's going to be a positive value. So this will give me a 0. So -10 equals 5 minus 5n minus 3n would give us a positive 2n. And then I haven't done anything with that 8 yet, so I'm just going to bring that 8 back down. We're still trying to get the n by itself. It's not by itself yet. And so before we can get rid of the 2, you have to get rid of all of the addition and subtraction first. So I need to get rid of the 8. So the opposite of subtracting 8 is to add 8. And so whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So this is 0. So we've got 2n left over equals a negative 10 plus 8 would be a negative 2. And so now this says 2 times n equals negative 2. So in order to get n by itself, we need to do the opposite of multiplying 2, which is dividing 2. So we're going to divide 2 on this side, and we're going to divide 2 on this side. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, so we're left with 1n equals a negative 2 divided by a positive 2 is a negative 1. 1 times n is really just n, so we don't need the 1 in front of that. And so that is how we find that answer. I did not mean for my answers to both be negative 1. That was kind of like a coincidence. But you can always do that double check and make sure that you're right by plugging in your final answer into the beginning to make sure that it makes sense when you evaluate that. So if I wanted to double check to make sure my answer was right, I would say 2n plus 5. I did find that my n was 1, so I'm going to put a negative 1 there, minus 2 equals negative 10 plus 3 times n, which is a negative 1. So now if I evaluate this, I would have to evaluate the parentheses first. So plus 5, and then inside the parentheses, a negative 1 minus 2 is a negative 3 equals a negative 10. Now, I need to multiply before I can add the 10 and the 3. So if I multiply 3 and a negative 1, I'm going to get a negative 3. Then once again, you want to, on the left, you're going to multiply the 5 and the negative before you add that 2. So 5 times a negative 3 is a negative 15. Then a negative 10 minus 3 is a negative 13. 2 minus 15 would give us a negative 13 equals a negative 13. And so we've got the same thing on both sides, so we know that we're correct and that n is a negative 1. You don't have to do the check. On paper, you could just do the check in your calculator if you're comfortable with that. But I do want to see all of these steps on your quiz so that I can see, what you're understanding and where you're making those mistakes so that I can try to help you with those. I will have office hours today or Wednesdays, so you can always check the office hour link and come and do office hours with me Wednesdays if you want more help with these, okay? Have a good one. Good luck on your quiz.